Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. Depending on the time zone you are viewing this live. My name is David Cenciotti from The Aviationist. Let me check just a bit of housekeeping that everything is working, because we are simulcasting this live both on the Facebook page of The Aviationist and also on YouTube. It looks like everything is running smoothly. Okay. Today it's quite special. As you know, I've already seen someone commenting, I feel like this is going to be epic. That's right. The special guest today, tonight, or this afternoon, I called him the world's most famous F-14 RIO after Goose, and this is probably true. His name is Dave Baranek. He is a former F-14 RIO, a Topgun instructor. There's a lot that he can share. He's also an author. He has written 3 books, a trilogy on the F-14 of his career in the U.S. Navy. His career that can be summarized in 20 years, some almost 2,500 flight hours on the F-14, some, let me check, 688 landings, trap landings on U.S. aircraft carrier, and much more. So let me show you the guest bio. Let me introduce him. Here we go.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me on your program. I'm looking forward to talking with you about my experiences.
Thank you for accepting this invitation, Bio. It's a pleasure to have you tonight with us.
Thank you.
I'm
talking to you in the afternoon from my home in Florida.
Oh, that's great. I'm based in Rome, so here it's 9, just 3 minutes past 9. But we have people connecting from all over the world, so this is going to be nice. We have tried this time slot in order to try to be visible to anyone connecting from both Europe, US, and so on.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I've already more or less introduced a part of your experience, of your huge experience in the US Navy. Can you tell, first of all, let me start from this. Why bio? You are known as Bio. You explained this in your books, but I would like the rest of the audience to know how your call sign was born.
Okay, sure. My last name, Baranek, it's a Slovak name. My grandparents came to the United States from Slovakia, and my family says it Baranek. So in 1981, when I was finishing F-14 training, they asked us, the instructors at the RAG, the F-14 training squadron, said, hey, you guys are going to the fleet soon. They're going to ask you what your call sign is. So you should think of a call sign. So, you know, everybody was thinking of various call signs. Some people wanted to be Tiger. Some people already had, you know, nicknames that they kept as call signs. So I'm thinking, okay, Baranek rhymes with bionic. And in 1981, just a few years before, there had been a popular TV show called The $6 Million Man, Bionic Man. So everybody knew who Bionic was. So I went into the squadron and I said, I want to be called Bionic. Well, the pilot that I flew with, after just a few flights, he goes, I can't call you Bionic. and at the time, I was 22 years old. I was 6'2", but only 165 pounds. So I was tall and skinny. And plus, Bionic did not sound good on the radio. So my pilot, and his call sign was John Boy, and that was after a TV character also. So John Boy shortened it to Bio, and that stuck. And I go, okay, that's good. I'm happy. So bio it is.
So the short form from bionic, it's bio.
Yes.
Okay, so bio, tell us a bit more about you, where you grew, where you studied, and so on, before we start with the more aviation part of your life.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and I, as a kid, I wanted to do different things. I wanted to be an astronomer. I wanted to, do things like that. And then when I was around 10, 11 years old, the idea just hit me to be a fighter pilot. And I think it was probably because my parents used to take us to air shows, and I just, finally I realized how cool it would be. So once that idea came to me, I didn't change my mind again. That's what I wanted to be, as a fighter pilot. So when I was in college, and going to college was necessary to be a pilot in the US military at that time, my eyesight started to go bad. So I was really distressed for several months, because you had to have 20/20 vision to be a pilot. But I noticed that the F-14 Tomcat had a backseater. That guy was wearing glasses, so I verified you could wear glasses, and so I switched my my goal to being a backseater in the F-14. Now, like I always tell people, you don't self-select. You don't just say, I want to be an F-14 RIO. You still have to go through all this training, and the Navy can put you in any platform that they want you to go to. So for me, I was very fortunate that I ended up where I wanted to be, and that was in F-14s.
And what was, the rest of the ether that you followed in order to become a RIO? You went to, even this part is explained in one of your books. It's before Top Gun days, but let's also explain this part of your life.
Well, one thing that I like, and this is as you said, before Top Gun days, I have this chart. I'm going to show this chart because I love this chart.
Oh,
so you start here in Pensacola, and in my case, we stayed in Pensacola, and this is basic NFO training, RIO training. Then over here, the camera threw me off. And then you go to the RAG. So in my case, I was in Pensacola about I think 11 months. Then I went to the F-14 training squadron, the RAG, for about 9 months, and that was in Miramar. And then I joined my F-14 squadron less than 2 years after I graduated from college.
Okay.
And at that time, I had a total of about 200 flight hours in various airplanes as a student RIO.
While you were talking, I was looking in the background. I see an F-14 model. And also a flight helmet, some plaques. Can you tell us? I'm curious about because I cannot recognize what's in. I can see a silhouette of an F-14 and also a white piece over there.
Okay, so that's something, David. That's something I'm very proud of. The F-14 is from VF2, and then the other shield is from VF211. The top one is from the Top Gun squadron when I was an instructor. And then that white piece was something that the junior officers in VF211 gave me at the end of my command tour. When I became a squadron commander, we had a big party at my house, and late in the party, a bunch of the lieutenants went up into my attic, up in my house, and they tried to find some dirt on me. They tried to find embarrassing photos or things like that. And while they were up there looking, somebody stepped through the ceiling. They put their foot through the ceiling, and they came out and told me during the party, and I go like, okay, fine. Because I was having a good time, and I knew they would have it repaired, and they kept that piece and gave it to me when I left the squadron a year later. So it's good memories for me.
Okay, it's memories from the squadron that you are commanded. I have some question about that because this is extremely interesting. But let's start from explaining the audience what's the role of a RIO in an What was the role of the RIO in an F-14?
Okay, so that's a good question because a lot of people really don't have the idea. And the first thing I'll say is, I'm fully aware that many Navy fighters are single seat fighters. In the Air Force, F-15C, and F-16, there's a lot of single seat fighters, and a Navy fighter pilot is able to navigate and communicate by himself. Okay, but in the F-14, since we had a pilot and a RIO together, to make sure there was no doubt about who was doing something, the RIO was responsible for navigation and communication. And so I made, 98% of the radio transmissions. Every once in a while, the tower would ask us something or whatever, and I'd say, hey, you want to tell them or something like that. But I made, almost all radio transmissions, and I was responsible for navigation. So that's in the cockpit. Then I'll talk about other airplane duties before I go back to the mission. Mm-hmm. When we were studying the airplane, for example, to qualify, the pilots and the RIOs took all the same tests. So I had to know aircraft systems, the limitations for the hydraulic pressure, the engine temperature, how the fuel system worked, the emergency procedures. Pilots and RIOs had to know the same thing. When we got out to the plane, we both pre-flighted the plane, both pilot and RIO. And so it's very good. The Navy treated you like similar to a pilot, but that means you had the responsibility similar to the pilot too. If there was an issue with the airplane, it was my fault as much as the pilot's. So then in the F-14, just because when it was designed and everything, I had to operate the radar, and there were a lot of switches in the back seat, which we may talk about later, that the RIO was responsible for. So if we got into a dogfight, the pilot would be, managing the airplane, fighting the airplane, and I would be defensive lookout and backing him up however he needed it, watching our fuel, watching where we were in the training area or whatever. So
unlike many other fighters, the F-14 was designed to have two crew members. So the load share was indeed shared between the pilot and the RIO. You had an important role as a RIO. Also, as explained in the story that I published yesterday, that is actually the first chapter of your latest book. Let me show, because I have it here. It's a fantastic book, Tomcat RIO.
Thanks,
and it's my pleasure, because it's a great book. Every aviation enthusiast and F-14 lover will love it. And you also fired the missile, the AIM-54. So this is extremely important, that you can explain later, but this is something that some people may not know about the role of the RIO in F-14.
Okay, we'll talk about shooting the Phoenix later.
Okay.
About that in detail. Yeah.
Okay. So if you are, I have some images that we can share about the cockpit, and if you can guide us in a sort of tour of the cockpit.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's start with the, you can bring them up how you want, but if you can just pick one, start with the left side first.
Yeah, let me select the left one. Okay.
So when you climb into the cockpit before starting up, you strap in, you do the final, arm your ejection seat, and then you do a cockpit wipeout. And I'm not going to go into detail, but if you look there at the top left of this picture, there's a bunch of circuit breaker panels. Mm-hmm. And most of those should be pushed in. I think there were a few we kept out. I don't remember the details now, because it was 22 years ago. And then I don't know if that panel down there with the buttons, I don't know if that looks intimidating to you. But when I first saw the F-14, I was just amazed. Look at all those buttons and switches. But then after going through training, you learn them, and then after a few months in a squadron, you can operate them almost without thinking. You know, you just your brain, you decide what you want to do, and your brain just does it. I will say one thing, that panel that's right in the middle with the 2 sets of 5 buttons, that was our computer address panel. And it was, you know, you rotated a knob, you switched to the category, you pushed the function you wanted, and then you used the top buttons to make a numerical entry. There was no ability to put text in or anything like that. I mean, it's just, you know, this stuff was all designed in the 60s. Then to the top right, you see that's the armament control panel. It's got some switches to set for the missiles. That also had a lot to do with air-to-ground ordnance. And so for many years, I didn't touch most of that. And then in my final tour, when we were a bombcat, you know, air-to-ground, you had to make sure those were set up also. And also, one more thing on that panel before we leave is you can see the red missile launch button. It's a red button with the red and white stripes around it. And that allowed the RIO to launch the Sparrow or the Phoenix. Okay, you can go to the next one if you want.
In the center?
Yes. Okay, that's right. We can leave it here. We'll leave it here.
Okay.
And David, if you have any questions, you can slow me down. I want to kind of keep this moving, but I will.
Okay, I will try to see some questions coming from the audience, but later. Let's finish with this overview of the cockpit.
Okay, so once again, at the far right of the image, you can just see some circuit breaker panels. And then ahead of that is chaff and flare dispensers and some electronic countermeasure controls. And in my first squadron, one of the pilots that I flew with, he and I made this a system that we became experts on. And believe it or not, back then, this was, 1981, and I'm just going to make a generalization about my squadron. A lot of people were not that concerned with the chaff and flare dispenser. They were more concerned with the missiles, And so this pilot and I said, let's study these, let's learn about these. And so we did. We deep dived into them, and we figured out the chaff and flare dispensers, and that was just one of our things that set us apart. Then, at the forward side of that, the video screen is the electronic countermeasures display, which was back then ALR 4550, and then got updated some. And then the top right, that yellow handle on the far left of the image, it's the canopy jettison handle.
Okay. And you would jettison the whole canopy, obviously, because that is a single piece.
Yes. Yeah, it's a one big piece, and you pull that handle, though, and it's going. Okay, so let's go to center now.
And who had the switch to manage the fuel dump? Because this is something that often happens, that the aircraft has to reach the weight for the proper recovery aboard the aircraft carrier.
The pilot.
The pilot has the fuel dump. Okay.
Yep, pilot had fuel dump and all the other fuel system controls. Okay. And let me say, before I forget also, these pictures, I wish I had taken photos like this, but these are from the heat blur F-14 in DCS. And my friend at Reflected Simulations created these for me just to support this.
Yeah,
so that's my commercial. That's one of my commercials, David. Okay, this, this is really, it looks kind of small in here, but when you sat down in the seat, this was in your face. and the bottom round screen is 9 inches wide, and that's the TID, Tactical Information Display. And this is the old original version. It was later replaced with a rectangular TID. And in the F-14D, it had, data entry buttons all around it. Then you can see at the same level as the TID is some basic flight instruments: airspeed on the left, altimeter, and then on the right is the heading indicator.
And that those instruments helped you in order to assist the pilot during landing and so on, with cross checks, altitude and so on,
Totally. Exactly. Exactly. You one, and that's another point. I kind of say that one of the RIO's duties was like a co-pilot. Because I backed up the pilot on, I mean, I've never been a co-pilot, so I don't really know, but it seems to me I backed up the pilot on approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And also it was my responsibility to initiate checklists, takeoff checklist,
Okay.
landing checklist, and all that. Then the final thing I'll say is top, and well, at the bottom center is the hand control unit, and all that did was control different parts of the radar. The hand controller. The RIO had no flight controls. And then at the top center is the raw radar display. And technically it wasn't exactly raw radar. It was some kind of synthetic, but it was very close to raw radar. And all those buttons there that have radar adjustment and mode control, once again, they became almost, subliminal. You just instinctively did what you did after you learned, and became comfortable doing it. And then at the very top is the ACM handle, that grab bar that the RIO would grab onto and turn around in a dogfight. He'd use that as leverage.
Was it particularly difficult, especially in the beginning, to move inside the cockpit and to turn your head? Tell us something about the ergonomics of the cockpit. Was it large or not? Could you move?
Oh yeah, the F-14, and I've flown the smallest cockpit I flew in was the TA-4 Skyhawk in Pensacola.
Okay.
And then the F-5F Tiger that I flew in at Topgun had a nice size cockpit, but the F-14 was a very large cockpit, a very spacious canopy. And if you turned your head properly, you put your head to one side and turned it around hard, you could see back between the tails. Now, if your pilot is pulling 6 or 6.5 Gs, that's going to be very hard to do. But it really became easier after a few months of being in the fleet. And, I guess when you get in a dogfight, your adrenaline is pumping or whatever, and you can just handle the G's and you do what you need to do.
And in order to answer one of the questions coming from the audience, I don't know if you can see it, was the RIO involved in not overstressing the airframe during maneuvering? Did you also call the G or the limits to the pilot during ACM or during maneuvering, or not? Since
no.
the aircraft, okay.
There was no G meter in the back seat. And the F-14, I don't think any Tomcat had any type of fly-by-wire. Later, they had digital flight controls, but I don't know if that limited controls. It may have. But no, an F-14 pilot could very easily, he could overstress the airplane if he wasn't careful.
Okay.
And so as a RIO, I was only involved in a few overstresses. And I have to say, that based on the situation, they seemed like a good idea. So it's like, yeah, we needed to do that. And I remember feeling, that was more than 6.5 Gs, but I'm okay. One time I pulled 8 Gs in an F-14.
Oh, that's great.
That's not a big deal. I remember, I think, reading that the plane was designed to handle 9 Gs. And it probably could pull more than that. And there have been stories online that people have done that. But the Navy limited it to 6.5 for airframe longevity, stuff like that.
Okay. There was another question about the role of the RIO, and from Matteo. Do you think that this role is being replaced by technology? Are there going to be any two-seaters fighter jets in the future?
Man, I hate to say it, Matteo, because there may be thousands of young people who wear glasses. Of course, now in the U.S. services, you can get eye surgery of certain types. I don't know what the details are, but I do think That's hard to say because the Air Force has the F-15E, which is a two-seater, and one out of the 4 squadrons on a carrier is the F-18F. That's a two-seater. The other 3 are single-seat F-18E squadrons. Yeah, it's hard for me to make predictions, but it is true that when the F-14 was designed, the Navy, they could not automate the radar performance in the most demanding scenario, and one of those scenarios was the outer air battle, defending an aircraft carrier battle group from a coordinated raid by Soviet bombers and jammers. I mean, that's like, it's all on the table. And they wanted 2 guys in the plane. They wanted 1 guy who could just focus on that radar and, keep track of the missiles and all that. But, David, I just introduced, for myself, I introduced a topic that I always like to cover. The F-14 was not designed as an interceptor. Some people like to say that, but when it was designed, it had to do both missions. It was the Navy's tactical fighter, and it also had to be a great fleet air defense aircraft. I mean, it was designed as a fighter to escort strikes, to conduct fighter sweeps and stuff like that. Okay, I said it.
Okay. And Matteo says that you got the point because he wears glasses. That's why the question came. So
don't give up. Don't give up, Matteo. Work all angles. If you have a dream, work all the angles.
That's a good suggestion. And dealing with the radar that we can see in the cockpit, the RIO was responsible for the whole geometry of an interception of an engagement. Is that right?
Yes, the RIO was responsible. Of course, the pilot is holding the stick and throttles, and if he's looking at the picture and he goes, I think we need to go over here, he could drive the airplane over there, because the pilot had the TID picture repeated. Okay, so he could see the tactical picture. But I think back to all the pilots that I flew with, they trusted me and respected me, and they expected me to control the intercept. So it wasn't like, they're driving, they do their own thing, and then I go, no, go over here. They would wait for me to tell them what to do. That's just division of responsibility. And then I would, it was up to me to say, come right 30 degrees or come right to 300 and let's get outside these guys, or let's force trail or whatever. Okay,
understood.
Yeah.
Okay. There are already questions coming from the audience about another question that I wanted to do. It's about the pairing with the pilots. There's Steve who asks, how long did you stay with the same pilot? If you rotated, or do you become the best buddies for a long time? Was there, let's say, a rule, or it was more or less depending on several things: availability, experience, training?
Okay, well, it wasn't a written rule, but in all 3 of my squadrons, I was in 3 different F-14 squadrons, and I knew guys in other squadrons. I think it was the same. So the squadron would assign pilots and RIOs to be a pair, and those 2 guys would fly together about 80 to 90% of the time. So most of the time they would fly together. And the good thing about that is they developed very good crew coordination. They would learn each other's strengths and all that. But it was also good that when you switched to, if I would fly with a different pilot, he might tell me, oh, Bio, you shouldn't do that, or my RIO does this. Or I would tell him the same thing. So switching off a little bit was good for standardization and cross training, or however you want to call it. And then the squadron would usually leave those pairs assigned for 6 months to a year, and then change again.
Okay. And I will respond to another question about the retirement. You will respond about the retirement, but I have in mind a different. It's something that I want to cover later during this interview.
Let's bring it up later then.
Okay. What I wanted to ask, it's about, because this is something that you cover, and is among the most interesting things that I've found in Tomcat RIO is about the concept of complacency. I mean, if I recall correctly, it was by discussing this with one of your pilots that you understood that this could become a problem. Can you explain to all of us what complacency is and also the risk it poses to flight safety?
Yes, complacency, and I got to tell you that having this story was one of the reasons I wanted to write the book Tomcat RIO, because David, I know you've been flying in jets, and you probably get excited about it, but you're getting a little bit comfortable, maybe. Okay, I don't know. You don't have to reveal anything. Okay, so when your job is to fly the F-14, and back then we would fly it, roughly 30 hours a month. So that's 15 or 20 times a month. And then some flights are routine flights. If you go out there and you fly for a 1 hour, 1.5 hour dogfight flight, that's very exciting. But if you're doing a patrol or something like that, it's like, okay, we're going to go up, we're going to patrol, nothing's going to happen. And so you could actually become complacent. I mean, and I remember I said this, I thought this to myself. Sometimes I would be bored, but after, just a couple of seconds, I go, I'm bored in an F-14. And I felt fortunate to be like that. But, one time I fell asleep in the airplane. There have been other stories of pilots and RIOs who said they fell asleep. So, there's autopilot and it's rare, but it happens. So when I was in my second squadron, I had about more than 1,200 F-14 hours, a pretty good level of experience. And the pilot I was flying with, he'd flown F-4s and was converted to F-14s, but he had, like 1,200 fighter hours also. And so we both felt comfortable. We were comfortable flying the jets, and we're flying a low stress mission. And we flew a couple of low stress, not very demanding missions. And one time he missed a switch in the front cockpit, and the next flight I missed a switch in the back cockpit in terms of, setting it when you take off. And as soon as we took off after the second incident, he comes up and goes, "Bio, we're complacent." And when he said that, he was right. I didn't argue with him. I go, "You're right, Hooter," and so that really got our attention, and it helped us to be more careful for the rest of our flying. And the Naval Safety, the reason he said that is because the Naval Safety Center had written an article in Approach magazine, I believe, that talked about complacency. They said that the mishap rate for aviators, the rate got better and better as you got experience. And then at a certain level, there was a spike that people had, more mishaps because they were complacent. And so, that was like a red flag or a trigger word, to use a common term now, a trigger word that got us to, hey, we need to really, be alert, pay attention, blah, blah.
Okay. But another thing interesting that you say in Tomcat RIO is that during your 20 years in the Navy, you have always followed the written checklist in all your flights.
No, I did that. I every takeoff and landing, I had my little flip pad on my knee board, and I would open it up and go down the checklist
with your finger,
and I would put my finger there. But what the switch that the pilot missed and the one that I missed was in the cockpit wipeout before the takeoff checklist.
Okay.
And they were okay. And I'll tell you what mine was. I did not turn my radio volume up. My radio volume was at 0. And normally that's not a big deal because you don't talk very much on the radio during carrier operations. But in this one instance, the air boss had tried to call us, and so it became a big deal. And that, luckily, I mean, that's what got our attention. So
you had talked about the role of the F-14, but and you have also mentioned that during the second part of the aircraft career, it has become a bombcat because it has also flown in the air-to-ground role. But you have some interesting experience in the Reconnaissance mission using the TARPS pod. So can you share about this particular mission? And in this case, I think also the role of the RIO was important, not only in the planning of the mission, but also in the execution.
yes, a certain number of F-14s had TARPS capability. Not all F-14s, and the reason is that it costs the Navy extra money to put the cabling in and all that, and so they just purchased a limited number. And then also to make the maintenance more efficient, way back when there were 2 F-14 squadrons on every aircraft carrier, only one of these was TARPS capable. So in my first squadron tour, we did not carry TARPS in my squadron. And then when I got to VF2, we were a TARPS squadron. I got TARPS qualified. And TARPS is a large pod that's on the bottom of the airplane. It goes, back here, and it's really big, it's heavy, and you cannot jettison it. I mean, it's bolted on the plane and it's there. And it's got a bunch of cameras in it. And then when you do a TARPS mission, you have an extra control panel in the cockpit, and the RIO has to manually turn cameras on and off and set things and stuff like that. Whether it's on the right or left, I don't remember that anymore. So in terms of TARPS mission planning, the pilot and the RIO work together, because the pilot's got to do very good navigation, and it takes both guys usually to do the navigation. But then the RIO has to operate the switches. So when I became a TARPS guy, I understood why it was a more exciting mission. And one example of this was when we were flying in the Strait of Hormuz in 1987, 1989. We flew TARPS missions to photograph the Iranian coast. From whatever we could see. I mean, we stayed offshore in international waters and in the Strait of Hormuz, but we had, capable long lens TARPS cameras, and they were aimed at the coast and blah, blah, blah. We took the pictures. Now, I'm just, saying, oh yeah, we did this. But back then, Iran, I mean, you see Iran is still in the news today. And in the 80s, Iran and Iraq were at war. Iran was a very vocal and vehement threat, belligerent to the United States and allies. And, there was a lot of unknown. We didn't know if they were going to try to attack us or shoot at us or whatever. So we were on full alert. We carried, live weapons, but we always carried live weapons when we were on deployment. All carrier airplanes carry live weapons. But anyway, flying up there, doing these TARPS missions, they demanded a lot of attention because you have to execute precisely so you can get the picture, and also because we were up close to Iran.
Okay.
So it got our attention.
Was the pod, I mean, the picture was taken automatically, or you could also take pictures manually? I think it was automatic based on the coordinates.
No, it's all manual.
All manual, okay.
All manual. That was one thing that I was surprised when I learned about TARPS. I thought it would be automatic also, and maybe they're, now with GPS, laser range finding and stuff like that, they can make an automatic pod very easily. But when they designed this, and the early 80s or whenever they designed it, the RIO had the switches, turn camera on, camera off.
Okay, so you were fully responsible for the outcome of the mission.
Yep. And the other thing is, we sometimes took air to air. I didn't use that picture, but guys would fly above their wingman and turn the camera on and take a picture of the wingman, you know, or, you know, just take a picture of something they'd see on the ground, take a picture, you know.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And let me see if we have some questions. Eric, we will cover Top Gun later. So this is something that we are going to ask to Dave, to Bio. There's a question from Mattia, who asks, was the RIO responsible for navigation too? Did you ever find yourself in the situation where you had to do the math? I think almost always. And if you read the Tomcat RIO or the rest of the books, you will find out all the times that Bio has had to do the math and also to calculate the fuel, the leather. This is something extremely interesting.
David, you skipped a question. I am drinking a beer. I have now and then I'm drinking Kona longboard beer. That's what I'm drinking today.
Okay. Yes, there was a question from Roberto.
Okay, in terms of doing the math, I would say that all aviators have to be good at basic math. Pilots and RIOs, but yes, the RIO was responsible for navigation in the F-14, and many times I would be calculating, you know, headings, or I would look at a chart and I would try to, you know, eyeball a heading or something like that. But on the other hand, the AUG-9 had some navigation modes that would help us. And then also one of the pilots that I flew with a lot, he would look at our fuel state, you know, and we were an hour away from destination, and he would say, okay, hey, you want to bet how much gas we're going to land with? And so he would do his calculation and I would do my calculation, and, you know, you'd have to consider en route fuel flow, descent, all this other stuff, and come up with, you know, your landing speed. Of course, he's up there with the throttle, so he can adjust it, you know, to make sure he gets his number, but still I would, you know, I was game. I would calculate it. Oh yeah, you had to do a lot of math in your head.
Always. And there's also Todd, who says that he was a photographer on US Ranger and processed much of the TARPS film during the 1987 deployment.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And in terms of, we are talking about pods, sensors, more or less aboard the F-14. Can you tell us something about the TCS, the television camera set? Because this is something nice, and you say in the book it is nice to take pictures, to take photos, but it's not very useful in tactical terms.
You know, I put myself out there because there may be some. What you said, I did say in Tomcat RIO that I did not get much, I did not use the TCS that much.
Yeah.
And there may be some RIOs that go, you know, Bio, you know, you should have used it more, whatever. And I go like, okay, fine. So TCS came about partly as a result of AIM Val, ACE Val, the competition in the 1970s, F-14s and F-15s against F-5s. And they said, you know, if we could VID the target at greater range, we could get an AIM-7 missile off. And so the F-4 had something called TIZIO, the F-14 had TCS. And it was a TV camera mounted under the nose. You know, this is it right here.
Yeah.
I'm going backwards in my camera, so I always go the wrong way. Okay, and it had medium magnification and high magnification, and it was just a black and white TV camera. And you know, we would use it to turn on the video recorder, turn on the TCS, and there's some cool videos online showing TCS images. But it just, in my experience, I didn't use it that much tactically. And I think, I don't know, part of the reason might have been the haze. You know, if there was any atmospheric haze, it didn't help you very much. When I was an instructor at Topgun, I do remember sometimes we'd be fighting like F-14s out over the Pacific. We'd be up at, 25,000 feet in clear air on a nice day. The Tomcats would be pointing towards us as the bandits are in our turn, and we'd be listening to their radio, and they'd go, okay, it looks like I've got, 3 F-5s and 2 A-4s, because they could see us 30 miles away in the turn. And we'd be sitting there going like, okay, that's good SA. But then the problem is everything would change. We would, the A4s would do a spacer turn or something like that, or we'd do, azimuth split or something. So it's like, okay, you got that information at 30 miles. Let's see what you got at 10 miles, So yeah, I've talked a lot about TCS. It was cool. It was nice to have, but I just didn't get a lot of use out of it.
On the other side, you had the LANTIRN pod.
That is like the opposite in my experience. Okay, so I didn't use LANTIRN. In fact, LANTIRN didn't come into the F-14 until about 1996. I believe the first deployment was VF-103, I think. And I think VF-211, when I was the CO, we might have been the second squadron to deploy with it, or we were certainly one of the early ones, one of the early squadrons. So to get qualified on LANTIRN, I spent like 20 minutes in a little tabletop with a laptop computer and a little LANTIRN hand controller in a room at Oceana, sorry, at Oceana. I went through the little control. They go, okay, that's good. We went on the deployment. I made one practice flight, and then I was qualified. The point is, LANTIRN was great. It had an infrared camera that was, medium magnification and high magnification. It had a image tracker. It had a laser designator. It was GPS integrated. It was everything. And it had a wide, big field of view. The TCS camera could only go a small distance around the nose. LANTIRN had huge field of view. So I thought LANTIRN was just an incredibly valuable pod. Yes.
Could also be used for air-to-air. For identification, long range, not only in the air-to-air.
It could be used certainly for a raid count to identify how many there were in formation, because it was infrared, and at a distance of 10, 15 miles, you may only have specs. I don't recall if guys used it for VID at a range where it would really help you, but it could certainly tell you how many people were in it. And yeah, because you could, as I recall, you could slave it to the radar, or maybe you just had to drive it up there. But it was easy to use. So LANTIRN was great.
And I asked this question because it is somehow connected to the following one. That is something that I've also that struck my interest in Tomcat RIO, is about one or two almost incidents that you describe in the book, where two squadron mates, I think, were cleared to fire. And in one case, it was a French Crusader, another fighter jet flying somewhere. I can't remember if it was in the Persian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean. And in one case, it was a commercial liner. So I asked about identification also because I was curious to learn more about these two near incidents, how this could happen.
Okay, these happened in 1987 in the North Arabian Sea, which is off the coast of Iran. And the background is that I think it was in May of 87, I could look the date up, VF-21 Tomcats actually launched Sparrows at a target. Mm-hmm. And this story is told in great detail in a book by Lee Zadarain called Tanker Wars, which is a good book, and he describes his VF-21 incident. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because my squadron, VF2 and VF1, our carrier, we relieved their carrier. So their incident happened a few weeks before we got there. So they had actually launched AIM-7s, and then they didn't feel good about the situation, so they bugged out, and their AIM-7s went stupid without hitting anything. So we show up. I'm telling you, David, we were very serious. We were doing Operation Earnest Will, where we were on station in case anything happened, so we could respond immediately. And that was when oil tankers were going through the strait, and they had been threatened. Some tankers had been attacked and threatened. And so President Reagan said, you know, we're going to escort them, and we want carriers to back it up and all that. So one day during the daytime, a VF2 F-14 was flying in the North Arabian Sea outside the Strait of Hormuz, and a U.S. ship detected a high-speed target coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. And it goes, you know, this is not one of our air wing ships. I don't know what it is. It could be Iranian. Vectored the F-14 on them, cleared them to fire. And our F-14 pilot, he goes, this doesn't feel right. And so he did not, he could have squeezed the trigger and shot a missile because he was cleared to fire, but he didn't. He held his fire. He waited. And then when he saw a little speck, and he goes, oh, that's an F-8. It's a French F-8 Crusader. So, you know, they just broke it off and got out of there, and, you know, because there's no reason to be there. And then later, another F-14 was cleared to fire on an airliner, but he did not fire either. And so, I mean, these things happen. And, you know, I hate to say it, but I guess it's just the person who said cleared to fire. I mean, I realize we're talking to a worldwide audience, and it just kind of makes those people look trigger happy or ready to shoot. But, you know, one, that was more than 30 years ago. It was a different world, etc. So hopefully stuff like that, you know, would not happen again. I think the world has gotten better than it was back then.
And have you ever integrated with Italian aircraft? Since I'm Italian, I'm curious to learn about this, either in the Med Sea or I'm not sure.
No, I wish I had. Now, my wife is part Sicilian.
Okay.
By ancestry. She was born in the United States, but half of her ancestors are Italian. But all of my deployments were to the Pacific.
To Pacific, yes.
Yeah.
So
we fought against sometimes the Thailand, Malaysia, various other countries out there.
Yeah. And I've seen there's a question coming from the audience. Have you ever launched a Phoenix in anger? There's a description of the Phoenix launch in the chapter 1 that I've described in the article that we have published yesterday. But the answer is no to this question. And
yes. You know, there are, and I've thought about this. My entire life, I don't have very many disappointments. I feel like I've been very fortunate. But one of my disappointments is that the U.S. Navy didn't have any kills with the Phoenix in combat. I mean, I'm disappointed by that. It's like, ugh. Now they launched several Phoenix over Iraq in like 1998, I think 99. But they failed, and some of them were for like sad reason. The missile wasn't armed correctly when it left the carrier.
Okay.
And so it just failed. Sad.
And dealing about your experience aboard the aircraft carrier, you also had an ejection Can you, can you, there's also a video that you uploaded to YouTube that I can show. Let me find it.
Okay, let me set it up.
Okay.
This was, I'll tell you the short story.
Yeah.
Because, and I will contrast this. You know, I told you I was disappointed that there was no Phoenix kills. For me to have this ejection, it was exciting to have happen. And I mean, I thought it was very cool. Now, remember, this is 39 years ago now. But, and when it happened, I was 23 years old, but I can still remember it so clearly. Okay, so very quickly, on this flight, it was December 19th, which is 4 days from now, December 19th, 1981. We're in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It was a routine training flight, just training. I was flying with my regular pilot, who is the squadron commanding officer, Bill Switzer, but we were not scheduled to go on this flight. We were not even scheduled to go. But through a chain of events, another pilot had to drop out, and then they brought Skipper Switzer in. Skipper Switzer goes, "Bio, you're my regular RIO. I want you to fly with me." And so there we are leading this flight. So we go out. We had a great flight. It was fun. We did, you know, we did intercepts and short dogfights against A-7 Corsairs, which was fun. And then we came in for a regular landing, and then I'll let you play the video.
Okay. Wait a second. Okay. Here we go.
Yes, I uploaded this. There's no sound. And I put this explanation, so if anybody sees it on YouTube, they can see what's going on. You have to watch closely.
Yes, because it's not easy to see what happens, but
you can see it, right?
Yeah. And then you can see the going down. So it happens so fast. How do you manage to eject things? I think you had to be ready. You felt that something was not working. It was a problem with the weight of the wire. The weight they were expecting, it was not properly set or something like this.
Boom. Now, okay, so David, you don't have to tell us the details, and the rest of the video is not that good. People can, you don't have to tell us the details, but have you ever been in a car accident?
Yes.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Did your brain go like to super speed and time? Okay. Yeah. So that happened to me when I landed on the carrier. Normally, you know, you would land, you'd be thrown against the straps as the airplane decelerates. You'd come to a stop in about 2 seconds, and you know, get off the landing area, taxi to the side. In this case, we landed. We caught the wire. It slowed us down for a second, and then I realized instead of being leaning against my straps, I was sitting up. And I go, "This isn't right." So this is when my brain goes to, you know, super speed on my brain. So the first thing I did was my hand, just pure reflex, my hand was at the lower ejection handle. And then we're rolling down the flight deck. My brain is thinking of a lot of things. We get to the end of the angle deck, and the pilot goes, "Eject, eject." And I remember his voice. I kind of heard him like, "What are you waiting for?" So it didn't matter. As soon as he said E, I knew what he was talking about. I pulled the handle. And I had been waiting because I'm going, oh, if I pull this handle, do I really need to do this? I mean, it's a big decision. And so he said E, I pulled, and then the seats fired. And luckily we landed in the water. Now there's a lot more detail to this. I'll just tell you a couple of highlights. I blacked out when my seat fired, and I was kind of disappointed. I always I always heard about ejections because we trained for them and we studied them, and I always thought it would be cool to see yourself go out of the airplane, but I just blacked out because I wasn't ready. I mean, I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden, boom. So I opened my eyes just before I hit the water. Opened my eyes, splashed into the water. My parachute had opened up automatically because we had the Martin Baker GRU 7. A 00 seat, full automatic, an excellent ejection seat. Thanks, Martin Baker.
You got the tie. You got the tie from.
I do have the tie, yes. And then I splashed in the water, and my life preserver inflated. That was made by Connex Corporation, the Flu 8, saltwater activated, and my pilot and I were the second and third guys to use that. So as soon as we hit the water, we and I wasn't thinking about him. I was busy thinking about myself. I popped back up, and I saw my Tomcat floating on the water and the aircraft carrier going by behind it. David, that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my entire life. An F-14 floating in the ocean.
And the aircraft carrier.
And the aircraft carrier. And I'm alive.
Yeah.
After I didn't, when you pull the handle and black out, you don't know if you're going to live or not. So I'm alive. So then I had to deal with, I was tangled up in my parachute. I had to, look at this. I had to use this is my switchblade. Mm-hmm. This is my actual switchblade that I used. I had to cut myself out of my parachute, and the helicopter came over and pulled me up. Now, there's a lot more to that story, and it's told in one of my books and stuff like that. If you have specific questions, I'll answer them, but I've got to be careful because I can talk for 10, 15 minutes about the ejection. Now, a couple of high points. One is, this is the value of training. When I got in the water and I had to get out of my parachute, I had to undo my fittings and all that. My brain went right back to the training that I had in Pensacola. When I needed to pull out my switchblade, that was so easy because our squadron mates in VF-24, they used to regularly, they'd go to each other. Okay, Bio, you're in your flight gear. Tell me where your flashlight is. Okay, flashlight's here. Tell me where your die marker is. Die marker's here. Tell me where your switchblade is, right here. So I thought it was kind of silly to do that stuff. And when I found myself in the water and I wanted that switchblade, I didn't have to go, where is it? I knew exactly where it was. So, and then the helicopter crew, pilot was Lieutenant Commander Sam Taylor. He was in the perfect position, came over and picked me up. I was only in the water about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I mean, there's a lot more to the story, it was, I was very fortunate. It was just exciting and it was fun. I mean, I talk about it like it was an adventure, but I can't cry about it. It was fun.
I can imagine. And one question about the ejection that I still have to ask you is, did you have the time to also think to the proper position that you have to have once you just pull the handle?
Right. Okay. That's a good question because that's one thing I do remember. I pulled the handle and what happened. That seat fired. And one thing I do remember is I was blacked out, but I was starting to regain consciousness. And I remember feeling my head was down. And I was going, okay, I think I just ejected. I'm supposed to have my head up, but I couldn't lift my head, And I go, well, nothing hurts anyway. But, that's the case for being, 23 years old and relaxed. It's like I was just a rag doll, nothing hurt. I had no injuries or anything. Okay. Any other questions about it though? That's
it's okay. We have a question. There's also someone saying, Nicholas, who says that's a great ejection story. A troubleshooter on JFK in 1991. That's a Storm Cruise. And there's a question coming, and I would like to ask this to you, even though you may have already said this, but Davide is a friend, is also a naval aviator. So he has made the training in the US at Pensacola. And he asks about the CRM while flying the ball on the.
That's
on
a
the
good
carrier.
question. Yes. That's a good question. Okay, so for Nicholas, thanks for watching us and checking in. Thanks for serving. So Davide, what does Davide fly?
Davide flies the Harrier, the Italian Navy Harrier.
All right, nice. What a cool jet. Okay, so this makes me admit something. When I was in brand new Rio, and I was flying with John Boy, the guy who gave me my call sign, and I mean I was brand new, and after a few weeks of being in the squadron, I'm getting kind of comfortable, and it was really because I was naive. I was not accepting all my responsibilities and stuff. And so we would come in for a night carrier landing, and we're like at 2 miles, and I'm checking the airspeed, altitude, and I go, "Hey, John Boy, look at that ship with the lights on," So he's up there working his butt off to safely land us. And we got on deck and he goes, "Bio, don't say stuff like that." So John Boy really taught me a lot of stuff. And he goes, "I'm busy, don't ask me." So then when I flew with the Skipper Switzer, he had flown the F-8 Crusader in the US Navy, and then F-4s and F-14s. And he had been a Blue Angel. He had a lot of experience, combat missions in Vietnam. And so I'm, he's got, whatever, 4,000 flight hours or something. And I'm his young Rio. He goes, "Bio, when we are on the ball," he goes, "just, I think he told me just give him a couple of airspeed calls and then just say, fly the ball." So he wanted me to tell him, fly the ball. Okay. So I was like his conscience, And then other guys I flew with, they would say, "Give me airspeed, but just be very steady. Don't just be steady. Just go like a steady 1 knot fast, 1 knot fast, on speed," stuff like that. And different people wanted different things. I think I was never a RAG instructor, and I think maybe RAG instructors, in other words, RIOs that had to train brand new pilots, they probably said a little bit more. They were maybe a little bit more aware. They would check the lineup for him or whatever. But you really got to be careful because pilots want different things, and they're flying the airplane. So I wanted, on the ball, they're flying the airplane. I want that guy to be happy and comfortable.
And I take this question coming from Alex, who's flying engineering in the KC-10, to ask this question about the preference on tankers you and pilots had, and also to ask about the CRM during air-to-air refueling, because this is interesting.
So the tanker that I preferred is the one that had the most gas. I was aware that some tankers had firm baskets. Like there was one basket that we called the Iron Maiden, and I did not really pay attention to which tanker had which one because I couldn't do anything about that. Mm-hmm. We got the best tanker that was available, and we plugged on it and got gas. Also, I think the use of the KC-10, they put on these wingtip stations for Navy guys. That was good, so we could plug 2 Navy guys at the same time, and the Air Force used the boom on the center station. So there were modifications over time. Also, I'm going to say one thing here, and I'm not going to spend any time doing inter-service rivalry. That's not what I'm about. But the Navy back in the 80s wanted to get its own fleet of tankers, and the Air Force said, "Don't do that. We will support you." So there was an agreement between the Navy and the Air Force for tanker support for aircraft carriers. I tanked off the VC-10, the British VC-10, a few times. That was cool just to see that cool airplane, you know, something different. We tanked off A7s, S3s, and A6s back in our own air wing. So, you know, we tanked off a lot of airplanes. In terms of CRM, this once again is where I kind of wish I had been a RAG instructor. And I said that in Tomcat RIO because I flew with a brand new pilot, but it was Pager. He turned out to be an excellent pilot. But there was a time when I was wishing, you know, God, I wish I could really help him more, but he did okay. So what you're doing is, as you're going into tank, the probe is to the right of the pilot's head. So he cannot see the probe. He might see it in his peripheral vision. And so the RIO sits there and eyeballs it and goes, you know, up, right, up, up. And then the pilot flies it in. I don't know if he's listening to me or if he's doing it all based on the sight picture. So it was really interesting to fly a two-seat fighter. And, you know, both guys, through different phases of flight, both guys have to be ready to take criticism and get criticized in the debrief. And you got to have you got to have a thick skin, because if you can't take criticism, you're going to have a miserable life. And then two, when you got back from a flight and somebody goes, you know, that was really good, you know, it went well, or you did a nice job. It's like, good. I guess I can do this.
Okay. That's great. And there are some questions coming here. There's a question from Nicholas. You have already more or less said what's your opinion about the future of the two-seaters in the Navy, and not only. But an interesting thing that I want to use the Nicholas question to ask you is about what has happened to the RIOs in the F-14. Did they transfer? Did they transition to the Super Hornet?
Yes.
Okay.
Many RIOs did, and I'm glad you pointed out that part of the question. Many RIOs did become WIZOs in the Super Hornet. I didn't keep track of this, but I suspect a few RIOs may have become E2 NFOs. Okay. Or I know at least one RIO who went to the EA6B community as an ECMO. Okay. You know, electronic countermeasure. The problem. Okay. So a few years later, I talked to F-14 RIO, who I knew, who was a very good RIO, and he was an F-18F WIZO. And I asked him, I go, you know, you guys have medium PRF, you've got many multifunction displays, you've got all kinds of, improvements. I go, does it make a difference? And he told me yes. And the point is that when we were in the F-14, we had to spend a lot of time, the RIO had to spend a lot of time, you know, manually tuning the radar, adjusting things, tracking, blah, blah, blah. He said in the F-18F or in the F-18E, the radar is just better. There's fewer, you know, false targets, just certain things. The data displays are better. He said it just allows you to use your brain capacity to focus on the mission, to focus on the big picture, to do other things. So I was happy to hear that there really is a benefit to all these, you know, new systems. This guy told me it really made a difference.
Well, what some pilots have told me is that now a pilot is more an administrator of system administrator, more like using a computer than flying or operating. You heard that? Yes, especially with the 5th generation, you know, F-35. It's all a big glass. It's like a touchpad, and they select the various menus, and so this is the aircraft is so simple to fly, to handle, that what is important is how they can operate the sensors which are aboard the aircraft.
You know, that is I'm going to accept that without comment, and I'll say, okay, that's fine. But it's probably, you know, the way the old biplane pilots used to think about us. It's like, oh, you guys don't have to fix your own engines. You don't have to change your own spark plugs or, whatever. They had something that they had to do back then. But, that we didn't have to do.
Yes.
Okay, so real quick, I don't want to let this go. Somebody asked about BNs well received when they came into the F-14 community. In my experience, most definitely. When the F-14 guys were in the 1980s and we were strictly air-to-air, we made fun of the air-to-ground mission. I mean, we just, that's what they did. They made fun of us. That's what you do. But then when the F-14 became a strike fighter, and I was outside of the community. I was doing my staff tours when this change happened, and I came back to the community not knowing what to expect. I found the Tomcat community had embraced the strike fighter mission. The A6 guys were very much appreciated for their expertise, but also the guys who had grown up in Tomcats said, "Hey, this is my mission. I want to do it as good as I can." So yeah, it turned out well. I mean, it's professionalism, maturity, I guess. And I'm going to just give it to the Navy guys. They did a good job.
Okay, thank you for also for picking the question. For Ricardo, who's a friend, Bio has already answered this question. So there's in the recording you will find the answer about the crew coordination and so on. There's another question about the Sparrow during air combat. Who gives the order to fire?
That's very good. That's very good. In my, I'm just reading another comment. Okay, in my experience, in terms of firing missiles, the RIO was capable of shooting the AIM-7 and the AIM-54. The pilot could shoot anything. He could shoot any missile, the gun, and the pilot also dropped the bombs. So on missile shoots, I shot one AIM-7 and I shot one AIM-54 during a missile practice. But my plan with my pilots was always, if we get into combat, you are shooting the missiles. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, he's the guy who selects the weapon. And so, I mean, I've got a display on my screen, but he selected the weapon. Two, he might see something in front of me, like, maybe our wingman or something is crossing over, or we're the wingman, and anyway, so he might see something that I don't. And three, there was no doubt. We don't go into the weapon launch range and he's going, "Oh, is Bio going to shoot this one? Am I going to shoot this one?" It's like, no, you got it. And so I guess I would plan, if we got into a shooting situation, I would go, okay, we're approaching, our max. Let's wait until, our opt or whatever our pre-planned, our game plan decision was. And I go, okay, you got it, shoot, or something. I would probably say that to him, shoot, whatever.
Okay.
That's the way I think we would handle it.
It's extremely interesting. I didn't know this. So thank you also to the Majid. I hope to have spelled his name correctly for the question.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Let's now move from the F-14, from the first part of your career to Top Gun. I mean, to the school. first to the school. Tell us about your experience at Top Gun, how you were selected, how you became an instructor, and I'm particularly interested, even though this is covered as well in your first book, what was the role of a RIO in Top Gun as an instructor?
Okay. That's a good point. We've been focusing on Tomcats, and here's the Top Gun thing. Okay, so I will tell you how I got selected, because it's a totally different process now. So I went through Top Gun as a student way back in 1982. The Top Gun squadron had been around since 1969. And in 1982, you go through as a student, and I did not learn this until I went back 2 years later as an instructor, but the instructors were evaluating every student. And then at the end of the class, they would make a list of who they wanted to come back as instructors. And if you were on that list, then all you had to do was say, you had to tell them your interest. That was my experience. Mm-hmm. And so in my book, Top Gun Days, I talk about how I finished the class. They made some compliments to me, but I didn't really get it. I didn't think that they were saying I should come back. And then a couple of months later, I thought about or a month later, maybe I could go back and be an instructor. And so I talked to a Top Gun instructor in my squadron. He encouraged me to go over and talk to them. And then they said, yes, and then there was an administrative process, and it took almost 2 years. And then I became an instructor at the Top Gun school. And now it's much more formal. The selection of people who go through the school, the selection of people who come back as instructors. And one place that this is covered is in Bus Snodgrass, a former Top Gun instructor, F-18 pilot. He covers it in his recent book, Top Gun's Top 10. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that he covers, and it's a lot different now than it was back then. But still, when I showed up, once you show up as an instructor, they have, very high standards. They have very specific rules. And, they tell you these rules. And one thing that I liked about Top Gun is when they had a rule, everybody followed it. So I've worked at other places where they say, here's a 20-page manual or something like that. And then some people go, well, we don't really do this. We don't really do that. And I go, well, why do we have, Anyway, at Top Gun, it wasn't like that. They had rules for how to give a presentation, how to operate a flight, and all this. And it wasn't so much written down as told you, and also enforced when you're going through your training. So when you first show up, at least for me, I showed up and I'm refreshing, watching other instructors give their lectures and go on flights. And I'm going like, wow, how am I ever going to be able to do this? But it is, you have to put in a lot of time, a lot of commitment, a lot of hard work, but the other instructors will help you to meet the standards, help you to make it if you just keep doing your part. You've got to put forth the effort, and they will tell you, okay, keep working. You're not there yet. Keep working. And then when you get there, they're going like, okay, you're good. So, did that basically answer the question, or is there more? I mean, there's a lot. It was quite an experience for me. It was something.
The role of a RIO is at Top Gun is to.
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the role of the RIO at Top Gun. So when I went through Top Gun, there were approximately 16 instructors, and 3/4 of them were pilots, and 1/4 were RIOs. And that's based on, and then we also had an intelligence officer, and he gave a lecture in the class, so he was an instructor also. Now, when I was going through, we had F-4s and F-14s, and then the F-18s started to come through also. So most of the lectures, everybody went to all together. So because a lot of them were about the AIM-9 Sidewinder, the AIM-7 Sparrow, about threat aircraft, about 1v1 maneuvering and things like that. But then there were specific lectures. For example, there was an F-14 intercepts lecture. And for that, the F-4 guys and the F-18 guys didn't go to. But the F-14 intercepts lecture was one that a RIO always gave, but pilots and RIOs went to the lecture. So I did not sit there and go into great, detail about the decibel range, the decibel sensitivity of the AUG-9 and pulse Doppler search is this. No, It was tactical applications. It was recommended radar modes, formation, airspeed, communication, missile employment, things like that. They just had a RIO give it, but the class was pilots and RIOs. Similarly, in the 1v1 maneuvering lecture in the F-14, the RIO doesn't have any controls, but all RIOs went through the 1v1 maneuvering lecture. So it was very good in terms of crew concept. The crew was very well integrated. But yes, there were certain things that the RIO would have to know, and there were certain lectures that a pilot always gave and a RIO always gave, and things like that. But most of the lines were blended. They wanted the guys to work together. They wanted everybody to have thorough knowledge of the whole system. And for example, the AIM-7, the AIM-7 Sparrow lecture was very technical, but pilots needed to know that because they're the guys, who are shooting the missiles. So I thought it was an excellent course. When I went through, the course was 5 weeks long. Now I believe it's 9 weeks long, and it's much more demanding, but that's because air combat is more demanding.
And you also took part to the flying part of the mission. You flew in the F-5. So it was to observe, it was to...
No, I could... So yes, when I was at Topgun, we had 3 types of airplanes. We had A4 Skyhawks, but we only had single seat A4. So pilots flew those. We had F5E Tiger IIs and F5F Tiger IIs. And the F5F was a 2-seater. And the F5E and F, they kind of resemble the T-38, but they're much better. They have, bigger engines, leading edge extensions, things like that. Okay, so if we were doing a 1v1 maneuvering, we would always try to get the A4 or the F5E because they were most maneuverable. But if we were doing anything else, multi-aircraft, then the F5F would be thrown in there, and there'd be a RIO in the back seat. And many, and RIOs led missions. I would lead the mission. I led about maybe 3 times out of the Top Gun class because they rotated it. There were 16 instructors. Everybody took their turn.
Okay.
maybe I led more than 3 times. I don't remember. But you rotated it. And so there were times when I would be responsible to plan the mission, brief it, and I would be leading it in the air. I would be coordinating it. I would be flying. My pilot is responsible for our formation and everything, but I'm on the radios checking in the fighters, making sure everybody's ready, making sure the bandits are ready, and all that. And so it was like, as a flight lead responsibility, it was challenging. And so it felt very rewarding to get qualified and to do that because I was a Top Gun instructor. And to have my fellow squadron mates say, Bio, that one went well. I'm going like, good, I guess I can do this, So, but it was very stressful, mentally stressful.
And but you also took part in the filming of Top Gun movie, so you are also in the movie. I mean,
I was in the movie. So I was there when they filmed the movie Top Gun, and they filmed it in the summer of 1985. And the way, we heard about it. We all saw the magazine article that came out in 1983, I think. And that's on my website, David. And the reason I mention that is because one of the pilots who was featured in the article, he and I worked together to put that on my website, topgunbio.com. And so they wrote this article. 2 years later, the Hollywood people show up at NAS Miramar. And we also received a draft of the script, and it had major problems. But that's why they sent it to us. They wanted us to review it and help them solve some of these problems. So then, so we had a lead officer who was responsible for that, but he, he sometimes asked other instructors, what do you think about this? How should we deal with that? Whatever. And everybody got to contribute or make a suggestion. So then when we started flying, I mean, the first scene they filmed was the F-14 flying by the tower. And Bozo is on YouTube and he tells that story. And it was just a very funny incident. And we at Top Gun, we just heard about that because we weren't flying the jets. So then we had already made the decision about which jets are going to be the enemy. And, they talked about what can we have to simulate the enemy. And I think, David, what the 4477th is, right? 4477th, the Red Eagles. It's all declassified now. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so at the time, though, it was very highly classified, and so that was not out. That was not an option. So we painted some F5s black. They painted 3 F5Es black and 1 F5F. And then the A4s were used as the Top Gun class, Top Gun squadron. Okay, so when we started to film the flying scenes, they manned up, we manned up for all the black F5s. We flew out and we filmed scenes. And it was very interesting. Excuse me. I think I was on the second mission to film for the movie. And we had already talked about it. They'd already dealt with some issues about close passes and stuff. And everybody said, hey, we're not following the training rules, so you don't have to stay 500 feet apart. But still, this is dangerous. So, be very careful. And if there's any mishaps at all, any plane bumps another plane or anything, it's all over. So everybody was very careful. And plus, nobody wanted to get killed filming a movie. So, but it was fascinating to fly out there and fly next to the Learjet with the cameras and all stuff like that. And I think that I am in the scene where, Maverick and Goose are communicating. I think if you look closely, that F5 is a 2-seater.
Yeah. And
I think that's me.
So you're famous even before you started writing your books.
Oh, well, but you can't tell it's me, so I can't prove that it's me.
Okay. But I've seen also some images. I think these were maybe in Top Gun days that the black paint started to peel off of the aircraft. I'm not sure if it was after the filming or during.
Well, you can see it in the movie.
In the movie also.
If you look closely at some scenes in the movie, you can see the black paint is peeling off. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't notice, so I will look next time. I will try to spot it. That's extremely interesting. You mentioned about adversary stuff that was being done at Tonopah and so on. And so a question immediately comes to my mind. What if let's for a moment think that you have seen the stealth jet, the F-117 was retired in 2008, but for some reason they are still flying, probably flying the adversary role out there from Tonopah. Let's imagine for a moment that some F-14 are still flying. Do you believe that they can be effective in playing the adversary role? Do you believe that so much time since they were retired, could a weapon system like the F-14 still be valuable in for training other assets, other aircraft?
You're kidding, right? David, that's an easy question, especially if you can take an F-14D.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course.
With fully upgraded avionics, more powerful engines. The negative is it's going to be a large airplane, but you know the Su-27 is a large airplane and variants. And the positive, oh yeah, it could most definitely be an effective airplane. It not only as an adversary, but as a fighter.
That's fine.
I mean, it can carry, if it can carry a Phoenix missile is a very capable missile. Even though the AIM-54C came out around 1986 or 87, it's old, still had a lot of capability. So, oh yeah, the F-14 could be, I mean, that decision, some guys, and I know some people, they really get worked up about the decision. But the fact is that in the early 1990s, the Navy or the U.S. decided to go with the Super Hornet instead of the Super Tomcat. So that's it. That decision was made. But if they had gone with the Tomcat, or if they decided to keep the Tomcat in service, oh yeah, it could still be an effective fighter. Yeah.
Okay. That's one of the reason why several people still ask the reason why it was retired, the F-14.
They had to make a decision. They couldn't. There were two candidates, and they had to pick one, and they picked one. So, I'm not gonna say whether it was right or wrong. That's
someone had to decide.
We could argue that for hours. It would be fun to argue that. I mean, it's even more fun to think of what would a Super Tomcat be like.
Yeah.
But also, like I said, I talked to a Super Hornet Wizzo. I talked to Super Hornet pilots, and that's a pretty capable airplane. It's modern, it's capable. So I hope it's a great airplane because it's serving around the world. So I hope it's a very good airplane.
Yes, of course. But there are still some F-14 still flying, at least in Iran. So yes. We mentioned about Iran. So they are domestically modified, but they are still airworthy. So they are still flying somewhere around the world. There's a question about adversary training and so on coming from Ricardo. Not sure you can answer this question. Did you ever made ACM or training against the USAF mix, the aircraft that
David, all I'm going to say is to read the book, either Red Eagles or America's Secret MiG Squadron. That's just a subject I don't talk about.
Okay, that's great.
But those books are great books.
Yeah, I have both, and there are also some famous naval aviators who have been part of the squadron. They are very famous photographer. I'm about to ask you about photography because you are a great photographer too.
Well, thanks.
And another couple of questions about the F-14 that I have in my mind. How do you rate? You have had the opportunity to fly the F-14. I think that you only flew the A model. Is that right?
I got a few flights in the B because I had the AWG-9 radar, but yeah, 99% of my flights were A models.
Okay. And how would you rate it in the air-to-ground role? We have talked mostly about air defense, air superiority, something about reconnaissance, recce. But what about air-to-ground?
Very good. It the two-person crew. So similar to the A6, you've got two guys to manage the the approach, the tactics, and the execution. In terms of a bombing platform, it's as good as far as I know. And with the use of LANTIRN and laser guided bombs or GPS guided bombs, having a stable platform is not as important as as it used to be. I think the negatives, probably the HUD in the F-14A. It was good enough, but it probably could have been better. And I understand that was solved in the F-14D. They finally put a good HUD in. But I think the F-14 was a great air-to-ground platform.
And do you have also an idea, even though you have not flown with the D model, how the RIO cockpit that we have seen has changed during the years?
No, I was talking to an F-14D RIO the other day, and this guy, he works on the Instagram account with Combat Aviationist.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with Combat Aviationist a little bit on Instagram, but this guy was an F-14D RIO, and he was just talking about, okay, I started out in the F-14D, and I'm going like, dude, come on, So he's got all D time, but he's talking about having multiple displays, and he could put what he wanted on one display and then keep his tactical display. So they're fortunate, they have an F-14 with big engines, great radar. It's like, okay, good for you.
Do you play also DCS? Because I've seen some of your interviews explaining RIO stuff for DCS players.
If you look at those interviews, I did one great one with Australia, New Zealand DCS guys a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't fly DCS at home, but and I told these guys, I said, if you guys want, I'll fly along with you. So like I'm in an external instructor seat or something like that. And they did a great job of doing that. And we were talking real time. I think they had me, I was the RIO. I was acting as the RIO, but they had a guy doing what I told them to do and stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Then one thing though, I'm glad you asked that, because I am working with reflected simulations to bring out a campaign, an F-14A campaign.
Wow.
And I will say something else. A few years ago, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but a few years ago, one of the guys from Heat Blur wrote to me. He just emailed me and he goes, Bio, we're working on the F-14 DCS and I'm reading Top Gun Days and it really helped me a lot. And I go like, that's cool. I was proud to have helped him a little bit.
And dealing with your career, you have served with 3 squadrons: VF-24, VF-2, and 211. Is there one that you are the last one is also you were the skipper? So, but is there any of these that you feel more connected with? It's more or less the same.
That's hard to answer, and it reminds me of something that you got. Your favorite squadron should be the one you're in right now. And in my case, I was fortunate to be the commanding officer of 211, and so that's a special experience. I mean, I dug this out. They gave me this when I left, and because they couldn't use it anymore, they make one for every CO. So I've got it on the back of, that's for my radar room chair. Everybody had them. So, but I was proud to be in all 3 of the squadrons I was in. And I think, when we talked about this question, I was thinking about it, and probably my opinion of the squadron reflects more on my personal situation at the time. When I was in VF-24, I was a new guy. I was still learning a lot. And then I got, to be pretty good. And then when I came back to VF-2, I felt like I had, the most SA and I was my most capable person. And then when I got to VF-211, I had this responsibility but I was fortunate, to be the commanding officer of all these people, and which is a great honor.
Yeah. So, my question, another question was about what does it feel? So what does it mean to be a commanding officer? You can shape the way that the squadron trains, fights, and so on. I think it's
man. I got to tell you, David, when I became the commanding officer, and I would have to talk to other COs, and a lot of guys are going to give you, oh, it was great, I had a great time and all that, but it's very challenging in our squadron. And I go into detail in this in Tomcat RIO. Our squadron dealt with some significant challenges that were brought on by external factors. And we had no choice but to work harder and work through and solve these problems through our own effort. And so I felt like I just, tried to be the commanding officer that these people needed, and that they deserved. And I have to give a lot of credit to the pilots and RIOs in the squadron. I mean, of course, the maintenance department, they get incredible credit. All the enlisted people in the squadron worked very hard. But I was fortunate to have a very capable ready room. The pilots and RIOs were very talented, very committed. The lieutenant commanders were leaders. So, I mean, it was just an incredible experience.
And it's also nice to read and interesting to read your final speech to the squadron before retirement. This is it's great. It's a great part of. I liked it so much in Tomcat RIO.
Well, thanks. That final speech brings back good memories because we had been through so much, and so I don't want to make myself start crying.
Okay. Before we take the last questions, there are some about your future book. Any book that you might have in your mind.
Well, let me answer this one question. Can I? Have you ever felt scared? See that by Matteo. At 1641.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, when I was when we were flying off Iran, the Strait of Hormuz back in the 80s, I was more nervous, not really scared. And then when we were flying over Iraq, they weren't shooting at us, but I was sitting there going like, well, if anything happens, if you have to eject or get shot at. So yeah, I started to get just a little bit scared. I mean, I'll admit it. And then I've read other guys that led strikes, Tomcat guys that I know that flew, in Operation Iraqi Freedom or other combat operations. And they just said, yeah, I was scared. And then we got in the airplane and you just start doing your mission and fulfilling your duties and you work through it. And so I think a lot of guys will admit that, yeah, they were scared, but they were able to do their mission instead, in any case. And so the other reason I'm bringing this up is because, my ejection, I had to eject and the plane crashed and sank in the water, but it happened like that. But a few other times, and one of the times I talk about in Tomcat RIO is when we had our ECS, environmental control system turbine failed, and there was a potential for fire, and we're flying over Oklahoma and Texas, and it's 20 minutes before you land. And so it's like you're driving here. I'll try to make a parallel. If you're driving down the highway and you don't know where the next gas station is, and you're low on gas, and maybe your red light comes on, and you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, am I going to run out of gas, or am I going to get to a gas station? And so for minutes after minutes, you're worried about this situation. Well, so in the airplane, if you have an emergency and you're going, this is bad, and we've got to try to fix it, try to get to an airfield, to me, that was more scary because there's more time to think about it and work with it. Okay.
Yes, extremely interesting.
Thank you.
There are a few more questions, but first I want to ask you another thing is about the photography, because you are a great photographer.
Okay,
so
thank you.
How this interest in photography started? It was something that was born with you, so something that started when you were already in the Navy. And I want to share also some of your photographs. There are many you can find also online, but I have some selected here.
Okay, I think I got the photography idea from my father. He was just a amateur photographer, informal, but he tried to take some interesting pictures, and he tried to take some technically good pictures, and he helped me get started. but it's kind of like when I decided wanted to fly, I don't know a specific incident. So that first picture you showed was out the back of a C2. And the cool thing about that was to sit there and look at that F-14. It was like 30 feet away from us, just hanging in space right behind us. I mean, they're just on to work on your brain. You know, it's like, how does this thing fly? It was just very cool. And when we planned this mission to take that picture, we had one of our colorful jets with the red, white, and blue stripes with a bunch of missiles on it. And that plane went down on deck. And so this thing showed up, and okay, that's the picture I took.
Okay, let me show you this one. That's incredible.
This was just an evening training flight off of San Diego. And I used to occasionally love to take afterburner pictures. And in my case, some people like taking afterburner pictures silhouetted against sunset, but I like taking them. It had to be dark enough so you could see the afterburner, but I wanted enough light so you could see what squadron it was. And so it was technically challenging. You know, I think I shot this at like 1/8 of a second or something like that. Yeah, or something like that. And the other thing is, so David, have you ever seen Afterburner at night or in the evening like this?
Oh no, in the late afternoon, but not in this dark situation.
Okay, so the cone of flame is just a fascinating structure. You know, it's 40 feet long, and it looks very fine. It looks like it's made out of glass or something, because and it's got all these details in there. I mean, it's just fascinating to sit there and look at.
I've seen this on the ground or on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, but you don't get the
I know. It's not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah.
And here we have this one with cluster bombs.
Yeah, we carried cluster bombs back then because they thought, you know, if something happens during your flight and you're going to have to react with what you have airborne, a cluster bomb gives you a good chance of attacking a missile site. You know, so because it's an area weapon. You haven't done any mission planning or anything. You just can drop it. But the other thing I like about this is it shows, you know, this is what we carried on almost every flight in Southern Watch. And you can see that AIM-7 tucked up in the belly. Yeah. If you look closely, and then the Phoenix, and behind the Phoenix is an AIM-9 Sidewinder.
And there's also a lantern pod on the right pylon.
Lantern pod on the near station, 8B. Oh yeah. You know, and I remember this was a Sunday afternoon when I was at Topgun. We rarely flew on the weekend back in those days, but we were out supporting a Marine Corps exercise, and we just had a lot of time to kill. And so we were in formation. I took this picture and I go, yeah, that turned out pretty good. You know, the different color schemes, and the F-5 is a cool looking airplane anyway. So yeah, I like this picture.
What kind of equipment, I mean, camera, lens, film, you usually used, even though I believe that you have changed during the years?
Back in those days, I wanted a built-in auto winder instead of a bolt-on auto winder. And back at that time, the Konica was the only company that I knew that made a built-in auto winder. And plus, you know, I guess I just wasn't very good with my money. I didn't have a lot to spend. So a Konica was a reasonable price camera. So I had a Konica FS1 or FT1 with like a 35 to 135 zoom. And then later, when I was a commanding officer, I got a Nikon, but it's still an inexpensive Nikon with a zoom.
Okay.
You know, yeah. I spent my money on other things.
Cars.
Jewelry for my wife. Okay, this was myself with Rat Willard after filming an F5, a Top Gun movie flight.
Very
And that,
nice.
you know, we just got back from the flight, and I just handed the camera to our plane captain. I go, "Will you take a picture of us?" And this, okay, that was, and this. I mean, I just didn't think that much about taking pictures. I have one picture, and that's it. You know, I didn't say, you know, take a few of them or anything. So I, you know, just take a picture. You know, I like this because in VF2 we did watercolor camouflage.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
it's
David, I love that.
It's covered in Tomcat RIO, and it's among the most interesting things that you explained in the book.
Oh yeah, and it worked. I mean, we would talk to the adversary pilots, and they said that they could see. We had a few planes that we did not camouflage, and also the belly. We did not paint the underside, and they said that they could see it much better. But if the plane rolled, then it would virtually disappear. But this was at distances, you know, 5-6 miles. If you're inside of like 5 miles or 4 miles, you can't hide an F-14. It's just too big. But you can make it harder to see at certain ranges.
And there was a question coming from Hunter. What's the best F-14 color scheme you ever saw?
I like these, man.
This one.
I like our watercolor camouflage. Some squadrons also did nice temporary camouflage. A few of them are ugly. But in terms of standard F-14 paint schemes, man, I go back and I see some of the early pictures with the white underside and the gloss gray top, and I just go like, that just looks cool.
Let me show these are another couple of images that are extremely cool. Yeah. These are
David, once again, I was just flying a mission. Our wingman was forming up. I held my camera up. I took one picture, and that's it.
Yeah, you know? It's a selfie even before it was called this way.
Yeah, but I wish I had taken 3 or 4 pictures when he got closer. But the other thing is, you know, sometimes we were often busy, you know.
And then there's also this one that is stunning image.
And you can see some of the paint missing.
The second.
Yeah. And you can see on the close-up jet, you can see on the tail, the paint's been retouched.
How long did it last?
What's that?
Did you have to paint it again every week, or how long did it last?
Oh no, every day.
Every day. Oh.
Well, the movie people would come out and they would do the touch-up.
Okay.
I think the movie people did it. I don't think our maintenance people did it. But then also, these jets were painted like this for about 1 week at Miramar. And then I guess they went up to Fallon for 2 weeks, and they took some of the F5s also up there.
Okay.
And I'm sure they had to retouch them up there also.
Okay. Okay. Bio, thank you very much. But before we close, I have to ask you about something else. It's what you are doing on Instagram, on Facebook. There was a question about any upcoming book. Tell us something about what are your future projects.
David, thank you. Thank you for asking about that, for being interested. Yes, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, my website, topgunbio.com. And you know, I feel like I was very fortunate to have the flying experience I did. And so part of it is sharing with people, but also it's fun for me to relive this, you know. It's like when you get to talk with your friends about some of your flights and your experiences. So it's just fun. My editor for Tomcat RIO, who is David Robinson, so much fun for me to work with. And we're trying to think of another book, but I don't know if I have any more stories. But I would love to think of another book or another product and put something out together with him. Unless, you know, until that happens, I'll just probably put out, you know, the occasional magazine article or something like that. And I will continue. I've got a lot of photos that I have not used. And so I'll keep putting those out on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter also.
Oh, that's great. Everything that you do, it's so interesting. Brings in lots of memories about a different age in aviation, but we are still so in love with the F-14, with everything that dates back to 30 years ago or so.
David, David, thank you for saying that, but also it makes me think of when I first contacted you. So I'm going to give you a pat on the back or a thank you for running the Aviationist. I mean, years ago, I contacted you and I sent you a copy of Top Gun Days.
Yeah, I'm extremely proud of this with your signature here. That's so.
That's a long time ago, yeah. So you're doing a great job also keeping enthusiasts well informed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I've enjoyed talking to you today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for your time, for answering most of the questions. We have already been talking for more than 2 hours. So everyone can watch again the recording, both on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you very much indeed, Bio. It was a pleasure having you on the Aviationist for this live.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Tomcats forever.
Tomcats forever. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good night.